dangerous turn. A biolab is caught in the crossfire. We are talking about the National Public Health Laboratory. Experts call it a potential germ bomb. That's because this lab has disease samples. It stores pathogens related to measles and cholera. This lab is situated in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. Most of the fighting is happening here. The city has turned into a war zone, and the World Health Organization is worried. The WHO has raised an alarm. Now, it's not clear which group controls the lab, but it is caught in the conflict. As of this afternoon, lab technicians were not being allowed to go inside. There have been power cuts at the facility, and this could be very dangerous. The ceasefire is still in place, but it's being only partially observed. Countries are racing to get their citizens out, and this includes India. The ceasefire was supposed to last for 3 days. 2 days are already gone. 1 is left. It may not be enough time to secure the biolab in Khartoum. And the last thing the world wants is a mishap in such a laboratory. The last time a lab was compromised, it most likely triggered a global pandemic. The Khartoum lab is different from the Wuhan lab, but this too has sensitive material. There is serious risk of a biohazard. A WHO representative believed to be in the country has released this warning through a voice message.
So with the electricity shut down and with no technician taking care of all these, the risk of biological hazard is high in Khartoum because of the occupations of the lab by one of the fighting parties. It is not really necessary to say which party.
The risk is high. That is the WHO's assessment. And you don't really need an expert to tell you that. It's evident. You can't leave dangerous substances unsecured in the middle of a war, especially in a city like Khartoum. Look at where the lab is situated. Right in the heart of Khartoum, it is surrounded by critical infrastructure. The city's main airport is nearby, also Sudan's military headquarters. It is dangerously close to the lab. And a lot of the fighting is happening here. At least 14 health facilities have already been attacked, and now this lab is at risk. Quick background. Sudan is in Northeast Africa, and it has a history of instability. In 2019, there were mass protests in the country. It led to the ouster of Omar al-Bashir, the man who ruled the country for 30 years. In 2021, there was a coup, and since then, the Sudan is being ruled by a council of generals. 2 military men were in charge. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of Sudan's armed forces and the de facto president, and his deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. He leads a paramilitary group called the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. Now, these 2 men are fighting for power. The de facto president and his deputy, they're at odds, they're fighting, they're using their troops to settle the power struggle. The battle is between the Sudan's armed forces and the RSF. It started almost 2 weeks ago, and it looks nowhere close to the end. Forget about ending the war. Neither side is willing to agree to a permanent ceasefire. In fact, the 3-day pause is on shaky ground. It is, like I said, only being partially observed. Locals say they can hear sounds of gunfire and that fighter jets are still thundering in the skies. Now, the risk of a biological disaster has heightened tensions.
Technicians no longer have access to their laboratory, which means the lab is no longer able to perform its normal diagnostic and reference function. We're also concerned that those occupying the lab could be accidentally exposed to pathogens stored there. WHO is seeking more information and conducting a risk assessment. Power cuts are also threatening to make the few remaining stocks of blood stored in the central blood bank unusable.
So basically, everything can go wrong is going wrong, which is why countries are speeding up evacuations. At least 50 countries are pulling out their citizens, and India is one of them. New Delhi launched Operation Kaveri this week. Close to 3,000 Indians were stranded. They're being brought to safety. As of this afternoon, over 500 Indians have been evacuated. 278 were brought back via INS Sumedha, which is an Indian Navy ship. It had docked at Port Sudan to bring back Indians. India had also deployed 2 aircraft for evacuations. These are the Super Hercules aircraft. They've been used in a variety of missions in the past, from sending humanitarian aid to natural disaster support and search and rescue missions. The aircraft rescued 256 Indians. And in the days ahead, more people are expected to return home. But a lot depends on whether the ceasefire holds and if it can be extended. For most of us, hosting a neighbor is easy. They're familiar faces, they live right next door, and they don't overstay at parties. Not for India, I'm afraid. Hosting neighbors is a tough task for New Delhi, and this week is a big party. The SCO defense ministers will be meeting on the 27th and 28th of April. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and India is the SCO chair this year. It's always been an awkward platform or forum for India. On the one hand, the SCO is headquartered in China. It even bears the name of a Chinese city, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. At the same time, it's become India's window to Eurasia, and we'll discuss that later. First, let's focus on our neighbors. China's defense minister will be attending the meeting. General Li Shangfu will also hold talks with India's defense minister Rajnath Singh, and that bilateral is scheduled for Thursday. It's important for a number of reasons. Number one, the defense ministers have not held talks since the Galwan clashes, so it's been 3 years. The foreign ministers have met multiple times, but the defense ministers have not. And reason number two why this is important. The background of this meeting. It follows the 18th round of core commander talks between India and China. These talks started after the Galwan clashes in 2020. There has been some breakthrough, but complete disengagement has not been achieved. Interestingly, there was no joint statement after the 18th round. India released its own statement. China released their own. Both sides called the talks frank, candid, and open. Nice adjectives, but in the end, there was no breakthrough. The solution in Ladakh can only be political. So the question is, how serious are the Chinese? Do they want a solution, or do they want to keep the border alive? There have been some encouraging signs recently, like the Global Buddhist Summit last week. The Dalai Lama attended the event in New Delhi. We told you about it. He even made a speech. But there wasn't the usual outrage from Beijing. The state media blew a fuse, but the Chinese government did not say very much about this event. Does that signify political rationalism? Honestly, it's hard to say, but as always, the expectations are at rock bottom. Next, let's talk about our other hostile neighbor, Pakistan. Their defense minister will not be traveling to New Delhi. Instead, he will join virtually. Now, quick side note, there is an SCO Foreign Ministers Summit happening next week. And for that, Pakistan is coming. Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari will be flying down to Goa. And the obvious question is this: will he hold bilateral talks with S. Jaishankar, India's foreign minister? From all accounts, no. Jaishankar was asked about this possibility on Wednesday, and he said terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. Listen to this.
It is for us very difficult to engage with a neighbor who practices cross-border terrorism against us. We have always said that they have to deliver on their commitment not to encourage, sponsor and carry out cross-border terrorism. We continue to hope that one day we would reach that stage.
So the message from New Delhi is quite clear. Stop sponsoring terrorism, then we can sit down for talks. But Pakistan isn't showing any willingness. Just last week, there was a terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Poonch. 5 soldiers were killed. Intelligence agencies have not ruled out a Pakistani hand. Such incidents make engagement impossible. You cannot sponsor terrorism and hold talks simultaneously. So what should we make of Bhutto's visit? He himself downplayed it on Pakistani television. Bhutto said, don't look at this as a bilateral visit. It's part of the SCO charter, hence I'm going. I know I said expectations from China are rock bottom, but from Pakistan, it's even below that. And that's the problem for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You see, the SCO hopes to create a strong regional order, a Eurasian order. But the internal dynamics are problematic. New Delhi and Islamabad have problems. New Delhi and Beijing have problems. Earlier, Russia was the calming influence that kept India interested, but after Ukraine, this isn't the same Russia. So India's broader engagement in the SCO will have to be re-evaluated. Yes, it's a bridge to Central Asia. Yes, it can create a Eurasian order, but only if it remains firmly multilateral, not if it becomes China plus. Meanwhile, there's a new threat from China. It is building a new weapon, a weapon that can hijack satellites. This is what the Americans claim. It is part of a secret intelligence report prepared by the CIA. Recently, that assessment was leaked. And here is what it says. China is building sophisticated cyber weapons. They'll have the ability to, quote-unquote, deny, exploit or hijack rival satellites. Once this Chinese weapon strikes, it can make satellites useless. They won't be able to send data signals or conduct surveillance. In fact, let me show you how the leaked report describes the Chinese weapon. This is what it says. Their cyber capability would allow China to seize control of a satellite, rendering it ineffective to support communications, weapons or intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance systems. It's a clear threat, and Taiwan has taken note. It is upgrading its communication infrastructure. The new system should be able to survive a Chinese attack, or so Taipei hopes. You see, satellite communications are indispensable for Taiwan. If China decides to invade, communication networks will be a clear target. The PLA will try to knock them out, and by doing so, they will be able to cut Taiwan off from the rest of the world. This is a real threat, and Taiwan has no option but to prepare in more ways than one. It has also announced fresh military drills. They will begin next month.
Of course, our drills are based on the threat of the communists invading Taiwan and their recent military exercises around Taiwan. So the Combat Planning Department has designed rigorous scenarios for both the computer-based command post drills and the field drills to test the preparedness of the armed forces to conduct defensive operations and their battle planning abilities.
Taiwan's allies are preparing too. This week, the U.S. conducted drills with the Philippines. This was their largest ever annual military exercise. It happened on the SCO Island. This is a remote island near southern Taiwan. Military experts believe if China invades Taiwan, this island could become the front line. Because through this island, the Chinese Navy can access Taiwan's eastern coast. Earlier this month, the PLA made its presence felt in the region. They sent an aircraft carrier. It is called Shandong. The Shandong carrier conducted a transit in these waters, and the PLA did not stop there. It followed up with fighter jet drills. The U.S. is responding to these Chinese provocations. They too are conducting more drills with regional partners. Meanwhile, Australia is upping its defenses too. It has a new defense strategy in place. The policy was announced this week. It did not name China, but the report clearly spelled out the threats from the dragon. Now, Australia is strengthening its defense forces. It plans to build guided missiles by the year 2025. In fact, it's an old plan, but earlier Australia had set a deadline for 2027. Now they're pursuing it more urgently. More money will be pumped into this project. We're talking about something to the tune of $1.6 billion. And this shows a clear realignment of priorities. Right now, Australia has more land-based weapons, but it wants to shift to tactical weapons. It wants more missiles to strike far-off targets. Guided missiles fit that description. They can be controlled while they're still in the air, and they can strike moving targets. The trajectory is clear. China does not rule out a war to take Taiwan, so the PLA is ramping up its preparations. It is adding more weapons to its arsenal. It is engaging in military provocations around Taiwan, and Taiwan and its Western allies are responding to this with more drills, with more weapons. But not everyone wants to pick sides, especially in the West. You already know about France's position. Now we have the United Kingdom. London has spelled out its policy on China. Their Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has delivered a speech. His plan to deal with China is through engagement and influence. He wants to call out China on human rights, he says. At the same time, he wants to talk to China and try to bring it on board on issues like climate change. What about Taiwan? Cleverly said a conflict over the island will be catastrophic. Let me quote from his speech. A war across the strait would not only be a human tragedy, it would destroy world trade worth $2.6 trillion. I shudder to contemplate the human and financial ruin that would follow, so it's essential that no party takes unilateral action to change the status quo. Cleverly has also asked China to come clean about its military buildup on the high seas. Guess what China's response is? It's called London's assessment, nonsense.
China pursues a defensive national defense policy. Our defense construction focuses on safeguarding China's own security. Accusations of so-called Chinese military expansion are complete nonsense.
London wants a trade relationship with Beijing. At the same time, it wants to contain China militarily. It's not the first power to try to walk the middle ground. The problem is, with China, there is no middle ground. It's the rematch nobody wanted. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. President Biden announced his re-election bid on Tuesday. His big message? The battle for the soul of America is not complete, he says. Full marks for drama, but past experience tells us one thing. You resort to drama when you have no substance. Biden's campaign video talks a lot about decency, honesty, and respect. Listen to this.
The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity.
Talk about an oversell. Biden's path to the nomination is easy. Sitting presidents do not face much opposition from within the party. So the question is, who will challenge him? Who will the Republican Party nominate? From the looks of it, it will be Donald Trump. He announced his candidacy in November last year, and if he wins, it will be a record of sorts. Only one U.S. president has served 2 non-consecutive terms in America. And this was way back in 1893. Since then, presidents usually do 2 things. They either lose and retire, or they serve 2 consecutive terms and then retire. But then Trump is not your normal president. He isn't campaigning for the soul of America. He's campaigning with a vengeance. We'll get to Trump later. First, let's talk about Biden's chances. He's 80 years old now. He will be 86 by the time his 2nd term ends, if he wins, that is. Now, I'm not big on ageism, but I will say this. The average retirement age in America is 62 years. Teachers retire by 62. Doctors retire by 62. Cops and firemen retire by 62. So should the man with the nuclear codes work till 86? Well, that's for the Americans to decide. Biden has had moderate success in his first term in office. He got some big spending bills passed, like the $1 trillion infrastructure package and the $50 billion chip industry package. The downside of that? Higher inflation. Biden presided over the highest U.S. inflation in 4 decades. It has eased now, but people remember the pain. On foreign policy, he's had a mixed bag. Afghanistan and Ukraine have been disasters, but on Ukraine, he partially salvaged the situation. How? By expanding NATO into the Nordic. Finland has already joined, and Sweden will follow. But some big promises have been forgotten, like the Iran nuclear deal. Biden promised to revive it, but so far, he's not been able to. Under Biden, the U.S. has lost even more strategic space in West Asia. China ended up brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It was unthinkable a few years ago. But Biden's biggest problem is not policy, because let's face it, which president has wowed the world with his policies? Biden's biggest problem is a lack of excitement. You see, Trump has a clear rallying call, make America great again. He's the victim. And Biden is the deep state. The recent indictment has also played into that narrative. Compare that to Biden's slogan, battle for the soul of the nation. What does that even mean? It's good for a James Cameron movie, not so much for an 80-year-old's re-election campaign. Biden benefited in 2020 from a sense of hopelessness, because Democrats basically said anyone but Trump. But 3 years later, the dynamic is different. Trump has consolidated his base, but Biden has consistently lost his. His approval ratings are just 42%. Even among Democrats, it's only 74%. And don't get me wrong, Biden's shortcomings do not make Trump look any better. He was an erratic and bigoted leader. As journalists, we don't miss his 3 a.m. tweets about nuking North Korea. My point is this. Both these men appear unqualified, and Americans agree. A recent poll found that 2/3 of all Americans do not want Biden or Trump. They do not want a 2020 rematch. That tells you a lot about America's political system. Their leaders keep talking about diversity, about how America is a melting pot of cultures, how the American dream is the ultimate dream. Yet, every 4 years, it comes down to the same thing. 2 old white men fighting for the White House. Where is the diversity? Where are the new ideas? Biden will tell you that Trump and right-wing extremism is a threat to U.S. democracy, and he's right. But guess what else is? Billionaire donors and so-called philanthropists putting 80-year-old men in the White House. And speaking of leaders unfit for office, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan is up for re-election. His policies alone should be enough to disqualify him, but now there are health concerns too. Let me tell you what happened. On Tuesday, Erdogan sat down for a live TV interview. It was already 90 minutes behind schedule. 10 minutes into the show, Erdogan got up and left. You can see the puzzled look on the face of the journalist. But the rest of it happened off camera. Around 15 minutes later, Erdogan returned. Apparently, he had a stomach bug. Listen to this.
We had intense election campaign work yesterday and today. And during these works, I had a serious stomach flu.
Whatever the reason, he called off the interview. He also skipped 3 rallies today. So there is speculation about Erdogan's health. Could he be unfit for office? Such rumors aren't new. Erdogan's health has always been a mystery. Officially, here's what we know. He's 69 years old. He had an intestine surgery in 2011. And other than that, he's in top shape. But unofficially, there are multiple concerns. Some say Erdogan has Parkinson's disease. Others say he had cancer. Such rumors have gained traction because of 2 reasons. One is all the unnecessary secrecy. You see, rumors are like a rebellious teenager. The more you restrict it, the more it wants to break out. Erdogan has used the police to crack down on information about his health. And such tactics have obviously backfired. So that's one factor. The second one is the camera curse. Photographers have snapped Erdogan sleeping at official events. I'm talking about summits and joint briefings. Such pictures do not help his cause. But let's keep the health aside for a moment. Let's focus on the politics. What are Erdogan's chances in the elections next month? Not that good. He's been ruling Turkey for almost 20 years, so anti-incumbency is massive. Plus, he faces a united opposition. 6 parties have come together to nominate one candidate. This man, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He's a former civil servant. He's also soft-spoken, unassuming and studious. Not exactly ideal leadership material. So why is he leading the polls? Because he's also non-controversial. The Turkish people have already tried out the right-wing demigod. They got 85% inflation in return. So now they want some sanity in the president's office. Enter Kılıçdaroğlu. They call him the Turkish Gandhi. It has nothing to do with India. They call him that because of his physical stature. His party traces its roots to Turkey's founder, Kemal Atatürk. He's also considered close to the secular army. Simply put, he's the ideological opposite of President Erdogan. Opinion polls show him leading, but it's a slender lead. Most experts are predicting around 2. But all these polls and analysis are based on one assumption, that the elections will be fair. Now, Erdogan is not a typical democratic leader. He may walk out of an interview, but he won't walk out of power, not without putting up a fight. Reports say the Kurdish vote is expected to play a big role in this election. They are the largest ethnic minority in Turkey, the Kurds. Their total size is around 20% of the population. Now, most Kurds live in eastern and southeastern Turkey. If things are close, the Kurds could be the kingmakers. So who are they supporting? Well, no body on paper. The pro-Kurdish parties have not nominated a presidential candidate, and by doing so, they've boosted Kılıçdaroğlu's chances, sort of like outside support, undeclared. So guess what Erdogan is doing in response? He's rounding up the Kurds. At least 126 people have been arrested across Turkey. Their crime? Suspected links to Kurdish military groups. It's a classic Erdogan strategy. Liberally use terror charges to jail dissidents. In this case, journalists, lawyers and politicians are among those arrested, 126. The pro-Kurdish parties have questioned the timing of the arrests. They say the plan is to influence the election. And that is the biggest challenge in Turkey. When you rule for 20 years, you become the establishment. You become the rule book and the cop. And it's double the challenge for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Why? Because he's calling for a complete dismantling of Erdogan's policies. He's deeply secular, he's pro-Europe, and he's pro-NATO. So if Erdogan loses this election, the impact will be felt beyond the borders of Turkey, in Brussels, in Washington, in London, and who knows, maybe even in New Delhi. In Europe, 2 countries are sparring over a rocket. Sweden launched a research rocket. It was supposed to conduct research for the Swedish Space Corporation, which means it was meant to stay in space. But it couldn't quite hold itself there. It came down pretty hard. Sweden planned for it to land back on its territory. That didn't work out either. Instead, the rocket crash-landed in Norway. And now Norway is calling the crash a quote-unquote border violation. It's pretty furious. After all, the rocket could have caused a lot of damage. But why was Norway caught off guard, and what does it say about Sweden's space program? Our next report tells you more.
Sweden was feeling ambitious on Monday. It launched a research rocket from the Esrange Space Center. The rocket was carrying out experiments at an altitude of 250 kilometers, experiments in zero gravity. But the rocket didn't last in zero gravity for a long time. It malfunctioned and came roaring down, hitting Norway. It crashed into a mountainside in Norway's far north. Fortunately, the closest inhabited area was about 10 kilometers away from the crash site, so no injuries or material damage has been reported. But this hasn't stopped Norway from lashing out at its neighbor. Norway's foreign ministry has made a big claim. It says the country was not informed about either the rocket's landing or the recovery of its payload. In a statement, Norway's foreign ministry said, when such a border violation occurs, it's crucial that those responsible immediately inform the relevant Norwegian authorities through the proper channels. Notice how Norway has called the incident a border violation. Even if it was an accident, Norway has made it a point everyone knows that its borders were violated. Not by a Russian missile or rocket, not by a stray Ukrainian projectile, but by a rocket fired by Sweden. And that's not where Norway stopped. It also said, the crash of a rocket like this is a very serious incident that can cause serious damage. Serious damage to whom? To Norway and its people? Or to the relations between Sweden and Norway? Meanwhile, the primary scientific instrument on the rocket has been recovered. It's back in Sweden. Esrange, which launched the rocket into space, is embarrassed. It said, and I quote, "This is a deviation that we take seriously." Deviation, they say. Norway has termed it unauthorized activity. Its primary complaint with Sweden is that it wasn't informed about the launch, that it wasn't even told about the imminent crash on time. It only learnt about the crash after Sweden put out a press release on Monday, and that's not standard practice. The incident is not good news for Sweden or its space corporation. The European Space Agency has some big plans, so do some space startups. They want to use Sweden's Esrange launch site for high-stakes tests. But accidents like these could mean the loss of crucial space business for Sweden. Of course, space exploration was never easy. It comes with a host of complications, which is why Sweden isn't the only country making headlines today. Japan is in the same boat too. Tokyo-based iSpace wanted to become the first company to place a lander on the moon intact. But its mission has ended in failure. iSpace lost contact with the lander. It now believes that the spacecraft crashed into the moon's surface. So space is a tricky area, and communication among countries and space agencies when something goes wrong is key. Norway says Sweden did nothing of that sort on Monday.
South Africa is in a fix. Will it leave the ICC or the International Criminal Court? The president hinted at it, but did a quick U-turn. Why does he want to leave? Because the court has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. And Putin may visit South Africa for a summit this year. As per the rules, South Africa is bound to detain the Russian president if he visits. But they don't want to do it. So there's talk of leaving the court. Yesterday, President Ramaphosa said his country will exit the ICC. Today, he's made a U-turn saying there is no such plan. In fact, let me read out a statement from the president's office. This is what he said. South Africa remains a signatory to the ICC in line with the resolution of the 55th National Conference of the ANC held in December 2022 to rescind an earlier decision to withdraw from the ICC. ANC is the ruling party of South Africa. The ICC, as you would know, is an intergovernmental court. It was conceived by the UN in 1998 to prosecute war crimes. It started functioning in the year 2002. The ICC is headquartered in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And this is not the first time that South Africa has tried to leave it. In 2016, they tried the same but ended up staying. Then South Africa said it wants to change the court from within. But yesterday, President Ramaphosa spoke about leaving again. Listen to what he said.
Yes, the governing party, the African National Congress, has taken that decision that it is prudent that South Africa should pull out of the ICC, largely because of the manner in which the ICC has been seen to be dealing with these types of problems.
What type of problem is President Ramaphosa talking about? The court's order to arrest Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Remember last month, the ICC issued an arrest warrant against Putin. On what charges? The forced deportation of hundreds of children from Ukraine. That's a war crime, and Putin has been accused of committing it. Now, as a signatory of the ICC, South Africa is technically bound by its decision. So if Putin visits South Africa in August this year, they will have to detain him. At least that's what the law says. The Russian president may visit for the BRICS summit. South Africa is hosting it this year. Now, it is not certain if Putin will go, but what happens if he does? Will South Africa be forced to lock up the leader of a nuclear-armed nation? And is it really worth it for Pretoria to risk Russia's wrath? So far, South Africa has shown that it doesn't want to get involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It has stayed neutral, refusing to condemn Russia at the United Nations. Pretoria wants a diplomatic solution to the war, and arresting Putin over alleged crimes in Ukraine would hardly be a neutral or diplomatic move. You can see why President Ramaphosa thought it was better to leave the ICC altogether. Because believe it or not, the ICC arrest warrant is binding. All ICC signatories have a duty to detain Putin or anyone else that the ICC wants arrested. It's this exact jurisdiction issue that made South Africa want to quit in 2016 too. Back then, they were facing flack from the ICC over a different arrest. In 2015, Sudan's former leader, Omar al-Bashir, went to South Africa. He was there for an African Union summit, and he too had an ICC arrest warrant against him over war crimes. South Africa did not arrest Bashir. It got an earful from the ICC, and that's why it wanted to leave. But it's a difficult process. After a lot of legal and regulatory hurdles, they decided not to exit. It took them 7 years to declare that. So clearly, escaping the ICC is not easy. And considering all of this, what can the ICC do if South Africa does not lock Putin up? Honestly, not very much. It doesn't really have any teeth, the court. It needs national governments to cooperate. And if they don't, they'll get a lecture, but that's it. And countries can leave the ICC even if it's a long, drawn process. At present, the US, Russia, China, and India are among the dozens of nations where the ICC holds no jurisdiction. In fact, the US goes one step further. It has a law that allows it to free any American imprisoned by the International Criminal Court. It's been nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. I'm not making this up. So clearly, the ICC does not hold much weight globally. If Putin does decide to visit South Africa, he's unlikely to be arrested. But South Africa wants to avoid the drama. And it seems there's no easy way to do it. As it turns out, American big tech is untouchable only in the US. In other parts of the world, it is being challenged. It is facing more regulation and in some cases being asked to cough up hefty fines. Take Google, for instance. South Korea slapped a $32 million fine on Google, and now Europe is imposing stricter rules. These rules will apply to 19 tech giants. They will face more scrutiny. Which are these companies? What did they do to invite such measures? And does this set a template for the rest of the world to follow? Our next report has the answers. Being a big tech company may be a badge of honor in the United States. But around the world, it's turning into a liability. Take the European Union, for example. It has identified 19 very big companies. The EU says that these companies are so big that they have an added responsibility. Responsibility for what? For making the internet safer. The European Union has rolled out some big online content rules. They're collectively known as the Digital Services Act. Here's what the rules broadly stipulate. Companies must undertake risk management, They must conduct external and internal auditing. They will also have to share data with relevant authorities and researchers and adopt a code of conduct by August this year. That's not all. These companies will also be asked to do a lot more to tackle disinformation. They'll have to protect users and give them more choices, and also ensure stronger protection for children. Given the track record of big tech companies, they may try to wiggle their way out of these rules. But non-compliance may attract major fines. We are talking about fines as high as 6% of their global turnover. So which companies are in the dock? The biggest of the lot. The likes of Google, Apple, Amazon, Meta, Twitter, TikTok, Alibaba, Wikipedia, Microsoft and Snapchat. The European Commissioner for Internet Market made a point to single out Facebook. Thierry Breton said, and I quote, "Now that Facebook has been designated as a very large online platform, Meta needs to carefully investigate the system and fix it where needed ASAP." Twitter and TikTok will also be put through a test, a stress test, if you want to be dramatic about it. They'll be put under intense testing, and how they perform under stress will determine the stability of their systems. The European Union has a love-hate relationship with big tech. Europe needs these companies as much as the rest of the world does, but it also wants to make sure that these companies abide by European laws. It has slapped hefty fines on the likes of Google and Apple. American tech giants have been accused of tax evasion, stifling competition, using unfair means, and also spreading misinformation. In July last year, the European Parliament rolled out the Digital Markets Act. Its goal is to curb the market dominance of big tech companies and make the digital world a level playing field for all. Companies found violating the act would be fined up to 10% of their global revenue. In 2017, Google was fined 2.4 billion euros. The next year, it was slapped with a 4.3 billion euro fine, and then in 2019, it had another 1.5 billion euro fine. All these fines were imposed because Google was found abusing its dominant market position to kill competition. For all its faults, the EU is indeed waging a spirited fight against big tech. And that's a lesson for the world. Big tech companies can be taken to task. They just need to be given the right motivation, which, in the case of the EU, is the promise of billions of dollars in fines. Our last story tonight is about crickets. Crickets, plural. We're talking about the insect, not the sport. What are your thoughts about having them as food? A lot has been written and said about their nutritional value. And now a Canadian food writer has hit the headlines with her take. She says she uses crickets as baby food. She swapped them for meat and calls the bugs a healthy and extremely cheap source of protein. Now, for some cultures that are used to eating crickets, this may not seem like news, but a lot of the world is just beginning to explore the idea of binging on bugs. Here's more.
We want to give our families the very best to ensure that children grow up hale and hearty. That means making sure they eat their veggies and get plenty of nutrients like protein. After all, it's an essential building block for our bodies. But would you be okay with unorthodox sources of protein, like insects such as the cricket? A Canadian food blogger named Tiffany Lay definitely doesn't mind. She's been feeding her 18-month daughter crickets and swears by it. Now, crickets aren't some novel food fad. Various cultures around the world have been consuming them for millennia. They're even considered a superfood. Why? Because crickets are full of protein and other nutrients, like vitamin B12, calcium, iron, magnesium, fatty acids, and potassium. And not only are the bugs healthy, they're easy to farm too. They grow fast and have a very high nutrient-to-body ratio. Not to mention, they don't take as much space nor emit as many greenhouse gases as traditional meat sources. So they're good for the planet too. In fact, this is true for all insects that are consumed, and there are a lot. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says almost 2,000 species of insect are consumed around the world. Eating insects like the cricket is common in Asia, Africa, and South America. Certain indigenous groups in Australia eat them as well. India is no stranger to the practice of insect eating either. From fried udonga montana in Mizoram, known locally as thangnang, to ant chutney in Odisha. Some 40-odd insects are eaten in India, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Thailand is particularly famous for eating insects, with street stalls lining up to sell crunchy cricket snacks, or in other forms like cricket powder burgers.
We use cricket powder in our burgers to show everybody that the powder, as well as the actual crickets, can be produced into other menus other than street food. Crickets don't have to be on street vendor stalls that are served only with soy sauce. They can be burgers, bakeries, soft cookies, or even paprika seasoning used to flavor French fries. These are all possible.
This cricket powder is what the Canadian food writer feeds her child. It's extremely healthy, being about 65% protein. The powder has been around for a while now. It's easier for people who've never eaten crickets to stomach. Because insect eating is still considered odd or gross, predominantly in the West.
I think people would accept the edible insects more if you make their appearances less scary. You can see foreigners walking past, and they didn't dare try the insects. So if they are processed into something more appealing, then people could eat them more.
There are some risks when eating insects, though. Crickets, for example, are known to carry a large amount of bacteria. They need to be properly sterilized before consumption. But that's true about all meat. So the bottom line is, while they may look disturbing, crickets are a great source of nutrients. And moving towards insect consumption may actually make the world a healthier and greener place.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots. Images that tell the story. Starting with Russia, 2 strategic missile carrier bombers flew over neutral waters for over 14 hours. Meanwhile, a fire broke out in the Ural Mountains in Russia. Many residential buildings were destroyed. Efforts are on to douse the fire. In Morocco, the 37th edition of the Ultra Marathon kicked off in the Sahara Desert. And finally, what makes April the 26th significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster took place. The year was 1986. The plant was located in erstwhile Soviet Union. It had 4 reactors. One of them was to be shut down for routine maintenance. The crew took this opportunity to conduct a test, which went out of control. There was a drastic surge of power. It led to a blast, which blew the roof of the reactor. This was the nuclear explosion that traumatized the world. Emergency crew and helicopters were deployed, but it was too late. At least 30 workers died due to severe radiation. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated. Today, these areas in Chernobyl have become a wasteland. The accident contaminated wide areas of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. This was the worst nuclear disaster in history. We leave you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Свинца, сброшенные с вертолетов смертоносные жерло реактора, право на ошибку.
Попробуй,
Were they sitting ducks? Were they sitting ducks, PK Mishra ji?
Yes, I can well tell you, definitely they were sitting ducks. You were just telling about violation of SOP. Of course, mistakes do happen, but mistakes have happened in Chhattisgarh several times. We have lost more than 150 Jawans only in Chhattisgarh. It may be Sukma, it may be Chittagopha, it may be Narayanpur, it may be Kanker, or it may be Bijapur. I have gone to this Jaram Ghati and Darba Ghati after both the incidents where Bichi Shukla was injured and that incident, and how they retreated to Malkangiri through Tulsi Dogri. Those areas also I have seen. Somebody who has gone to Bastar, then only they will come to know how difficult it is to control Bastar area.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for even one corps of army to control Bastar area. Definitely, development is taking place. But you cannot, like the state is telling, it's a law and order problem definitely of the state. But Naxalite problem, yes, it is not alone the law and order it is not a law and order problem, and it is not only with the state. Definitely it is.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jambal. Our top story: the first batch of 360 Indians from conflict-hit Sudan have arrived in New Delhi, ladies and gentlemen, under Operation Kaveri. They have touched down in the national capital as the rescue operations continue in Port Sudan. Now, close to 3,000 Indians will be brought back home over the next 2 to 3 days. Now, 2 flights are expected to touch down in New Delhi tomorrow as well. Now, yesterday, the INS Sumedha evacuated Indian citizens from Sudan to Jeddah, after which they were airlifted and brought back to New Delhi. Let's get you the latest when it comes to reactions of these Indians who have come back home safely.
इंडिया गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत सपोर्ट किया और इस हम सिर्फ यहाँ आए, ये बहुत बड़ी बात है। बहुत डेंजरस था, इसमें हम छूट गए। ये मैं गवर्नमेंट की बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, नरेंद्र मोदी जी की बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया देना चाहती हूँ।
मैं सूडान में रहता हूँ, मेरा बिजनेस भी सूडान में है। वहाँ से निकलना इतना कठिन था, कोई शक्यता नहीं थी निकलने की। इंडियन गवर्नमेंट ने जो कंट्रोल रूम सेटअप किया है ऑफिस में, स्कूल में, कम्युनिटी स्कूल करके, वहाँ पे सबके रजिस्ट्रेशन होने के बाद जिद्दा गए। और
मैं सूडान में रहती थी 10 साल से, मेरा पूरी एजुकेशन वहाँ पे थी। उसके बाद सिविल वॉर चालू हो गया तो रहना बहुत मुश्किल हो गया था, गोली बारूद चल रही थी। तो बाद में इंडियन आर्मी और इंडिया की सरकार ने हमारी मदद की, हम यहाँ पे आ गए।
भारत सरकार ने बहुत अच्छा काम किया, हमारी इंडियन आर्मी, इंडियन नेवी ने बहुत सहयोग किया। उन्हीं की वजह से आज हम सब सुरक्षित पहुँच पाए। तो हम बहुत बहुत आभार प्रकट करना चाहते हैं कि भारत सरकार ने हमारा पूरा सहयोग किया और आगे भी सहयोग कर रही है।
I'm joined by my colleague Siddhant, who's reporting from the New Delhi International Airport. Siddhant, so jubilant scenes at Terminal 3 as Indian nationals are grateful to safely come back home under Operation Kaveri.
Well, that's right, Ayushman. You know, one single interview or maybe a bite is not enough to maybe understand their stories. A story of a nightmare to a story of getting rescued, which was not less than a dream for all these Indians, those who were stranded in Sudan. And in fact, I did speak to all those who have arrived at Delhi airport, and they were full of emotions, and they were thanking Indian government because they are telling us that they never thought in their dreams that they could be evacuated, because Ayushman, Khartoum, the capital city of Sudan, and that one city and nearby area of 100 kilometers is worst affected because of the ongoing war between the two warring groups. And in fact, people are telling us the stories that how they have lived without food, without water. Even some of them were looted by RSF groups. So there are a lot of stories to tell. But then again, at last they thank Indian government for doing something which they never thought of ever happening in their lives. They never thought of returning back to India, but that is today happening, and many have said that this is the biggest day of their lives. And in fact, all of them are thanking Prime Minister Narendra Modi for making such arrangements. And in fact, right after they got deboarded from flight, the news agency was right there inside the airport, and the visuals that we are playing right now, we can hear the chants of Narendra Modi Zindabad, Bharat Sarkar Zindabad. So these are the emotions that all these passengers are expressing. They're thanking Indian government for the efforts that the government has been making. Also, very important, Ayushman, many of these evacuees told me that none of them were hurt or maybe harassed by the forces on ground, because they had a message from the top, both RSF and Sudanese army, that not to touch Indians is stranded. And so it again explains the kind of clout, the kind